Hello. Hello. Good afternoon. Thank you for taking time to join us today. We understand that there are many exciting sessions going out there, so we appreciate you taking the time and for your interest to join us here. We've been hearing about the road to net zero, we've been hearing about sustainable products, we've been hearing about sustainability and all of that. And perhaps like many of us out there, you might also have questions. Really, is it happening, or are we all greenwashing like a pro? Well, thankfully, we have expertise, we have knowledge, and we have wisdom out here to share with you what's going on and to share with you concrete examples on the path forward in this regards. So at first I want to say thank you all for being here, for your time. But also let's start briefly introducing our experts and our panelists here. We have Helga. She has 20 years of experience working with McKinsey. She was involved via Wealth of Flows and ADM Capital. She is contributing in coming up with better policies for Hong Kong. So they are a think, do tank, and she also collaborates closely with Civic Exchange. Then we have Ms. Sheila Shek. She's with Adidas. So she and her company is helping many of us have a healthy lifestyle and enjoy the outdoors. She'll share with us what you are doing in the supply chain to make things better for the environment. Then we have met Elsa Pau. She has many decades of experience working with the finance sector. She's founded many companies, and at the moment, she's here. She's going to share with us what BlueOnion, this fintech company, is doing in terms of demystifying the data about companies and also showcasing what investors are looking for and what investors are doing. And then we have Rodney. He's with HASBRO. He's making sure that the toys that many of the kids and adults play with are safer and they are more fun to play. And he'll share about the focus that they have on chemicals and how it impacts the other aspects of performance of the company. My name is Rakesh Vazirani. I'm with TUV Rheinland, and I have the privilege and pleasure of being the moderator and host for today's session. So, at first, let's set the stage. Okay. So let's set the stage, yeah? We've heard about what's happening. The big picture is the scorching summer. It has broken all records. The other aspect is the issue with energy prices. The other aspect is issue with food and grains and trade. But let's now bring it down to products. So overall, the retail market globally, it's $43 trillion. In Hong Kong, it is $430 billion per year. So what happens with those retail products? What we see here is this report from BCG and Sustainable Brands is showcasing, it just came out 2 weeks back, about the interest of consumers to buy more environmentally sustainable products, and actually for how many percentage of them sustainability is the top need. So you see that overall about 85% of consumers in some countries say yes, we want to buy better sustainable products, and only about 5 to 7% of them say yes, sustainability played a role in decision making. Okay, that's from the consumer side, yeah. At the same time, what we see is news like this about greenwashing, not just on product level and company level, but also with what's going on in the capital markets. We hear about companies leaving this so-called coalition GFANs. We also hear about market regulators and competition authorities in Netherlands, in Australia, in UK, stepping up action against greenwashing. And many international brands and retailers are their focus. So consumers already not quite sure if they should buy sustainable products, and then comes this double whammy of greenwashing. But the finance sector, and we heard capital and finance sector is crucial and critical for this move towards better, greater sustainability. From the United Nations Principles for Responsible Investment, we see this, one of the members, Amundi Institute, mentioning that based on circular economy principles and implementing it, can help reduce emissions by 40%. So consumers reluctant, issue with greenwashing, and big hopes with circular economy. Now the problem statement. Perhaps you or some of your suppliers might also be having this same situation. There is a company, yeah, Product Incorporated. This company wants to showcase that they are mitigating risk, they are a good citizens, and they are capitalizing on opportunities. Okay? This company needs to look at least 10 ESG reporting standards on company level, on product level, and indicate the information. So challenge number one, lack of harmonization amongst the standards. Challenge number two, lack of guidance on how to transform the existing processes. Okay? So the board of directors, they need to build this full ESG competency team, yeah, to address all of this topic. They finally publish a report. And when this report comes out, they have, of course, many claims on what they are doing. The rating agencies and fintech platforms look at all of that data, and based on the information reported, they come up with a rating. Now comes challenge number three. This company, Product Incorporated, is surprised, and they're like, what? Well, why now? Because of this rating, there's a lack of trust from the shareholders, and our ranking results are not so good. What did we do wrong with our claims and our process? So the consumers look at all of those ratings and say, oh, well, if your rating is not so good, maybe your products are not so good. Maybe you're not so responsible. Maybe we should not be giving money to you. So the board of directors, of course, look at it and they say, well, what do? We are totally confused. There's erosion of value, erosion of trust, and missed opportunities. That's the challenge of this company, perhaps some of you, perhaps some of your suppliers. As we start off, I want to request you to take about 5 minutes to use the sticky note and the pencil in front of you and to write down at least one and a maximum of 3 expectations that you have when you walk out from this room. What do you expect? What are you hoping for? You all signed up for this session about sustainable products, pain points, challenges, case studies. Would you be so kind to share what you have in mind? What expectations did you come in here with so that our experts are able to address them? So if you could take the sticky notes and take about 3 to 4 minutes and write down 1 to 2 expectations. Anything. It could also be you want a good lunch at the end. We don't promise that we will address all expectations, but whatever comes to your mind. We want to know the exact standard to you, the exact label to you. Where do we access funding from? Who do we approach for advice and consultancy? How do we engage with ratings agencies? And now, finally, as we are about to start, did you all have a chance to look at the expectations, some of them? Yeah? Okay. So, many in the participants want to know about exact standards, how to define and what criteria to use about sustainability. Many of them, or some of them have these questions about what about price premiums? What about getting access to finance and getting, because we have limited resources and so on. And what are the motivations? What are the incentives? So before we start off, a final request. You see the QR code sheet in front of you, or on the side here, or out here. If you could now please tell us what industry sector you are representing, so that our panelists and experts can be a little specific in some cases, yeah? So there must be a sheet on your table with the QR code, or out there on the side, or here. No? Oh, you don't have one? Sorry. Are you all done scanning? Okay. Okay. Sorry. Sorry. Okay. So we have participants from consulting, from fashion, academia, real estate. Okay. Consulting, academia, real estate. All right. Thank you for sharing that feedback. And now, as we are about to start, drum rolls, what do you consider as the challenges? After this, we will start off. So what do you consider as challenges, such that sustainable products and sustainable practices become mainstream? Oh, really? That's new. Okay. All right. So I got to know something new. Limited resources. That's also applicable to the survey. So let me read out the challenges. Is it lack of harmonized standards? Is it lack of sufficient standards? Is it lack of incentives, access to capital, yeah? Or is it this issue with the consumers not having confidence because of greenwashing? What do you see? Let's do it differently. Who feels that lack of access to capital is one of the issues to make sustainable practices the norm in your supply chains? Okay. Who feels greenwashing is an issue and that consumers are maybe not trusting, and so why should we? Okay. Now with that, so we see some of the feedback down there, and you see those peaks. They are indicating the issues and the degree of complexity. So lack of standards, lack of criteria, customers unwilling to pay premium, lack of enforcement for claims, insufficient mapping of technical standards to ESG metrics. So what does it mean to have more recycled content? What standard to be utilized? Green finance impact and so on. Okay, we spoke a lot about issues. Now, we hear from Helga about her wisdom, and yes, please, if you could take the next 10 minutes to compress your many decades of experience.
Yeah. Not. Just give me a signal if I'm losing the microphone, because it's a bit finicky in directing it correctly. So when Rakesh invited me to come and join this session, I obviously was happy to be here with all of you, but also I would say the topic is so big, so encompassing. That I was like, where do we start, right? Where should we take this? So I'll try and take on board some of the inputs you've given me this morning, but already there's so much. We could spend all 2 days here in this little room, but I'm sure you have other things to share. But so if we take sustainable products as the starting point, we inevitably will have to go to sustainable supply chains. And so I'm already upfront excluding all of the other dimensions of how to get to a sustainable product, such as, for example, the design choices one makes, the way one markets them, etc. I will, however, come back to the product itself, because I would pose that in order to have a sustainable product, you need to have a sustainable supply chain. In order to have a sustainable supply chain, we need to address the following 3 aspects. And I'm going to focus on the first one, but actually that will lead us almost straight back to the product itself. So the 3 key dimensions, in my opinion, to have, and based on my experience, to actually build a sustainable supply chain is knowledge of who our suppliers are. And since I'm going to focus on that, I'll come back to that in a second. But also what they are up to. What are they doing today? That's a big challenge that we have, and especially when we're trying to meet these standards, it's very hard to even, before we even try and meet them, it's sometimes very hard, or very often hard, to even know whether we are meeting them or not. We just don't know what, especially in long, complex supply chains, what suppliers are doing exactly. But then also, as we are trying to meet these standards, are these standards our only guidance on what sustainable looks like? Very many of my clients and organizations that I'm working with are saying, okay, we know what the baseline is. We're not quite sure how to move from there, right? Because, for example, there are so many different standards. Yes, they are not harmonized, but one of the reasons why they're not harmonized is also that they address many different topics. There is no overarching score of you are the best, you are the most sustainable product or producer, and especially most sustainable could be one dimension, but is it sustainable in absolute terms, right? The most sustainable product, one could say in many cases, is no product at all, right? If we are putting products on the market that are problematic in their very nature, what does it matter that we have a more sustainable version of it, yeah? Or then pulling it to its extreme, as Professor Braungart of Cradle to Cradle fame would have said, what does it mean to consume less? We shouldn't exist as people then, right? We are, inherently consuming, so how far can we drive this consuming less, consuming better? Now, so I'm not going to talk anymore about what suppliers are up to, or maybe up to, and what sustainable could look like. There's lots of inspiration out there. I know some of the other panelists are also going to talk about that. But I'd like to come back to who are our suppliers. And I know the very existence of organizations like TUV and their colleagues are very much playing into this, are working with this very topic, right? Transparency in the supply chain. And even, already today, we find this extremely, extremely difficult, and some sectors even more than others. The textile industry, fashion and apparel industry, for sure, lots of subcontracting, lots of complexities there. Other industries, electronics, for example, where we're not quite sure how minerals and metals were mined, whether these come from conflict areas or not, where these, whether any child labor was involved anywhere in the supply chain. So already today we find it very difficult. However, right, today we have a linear supply chain, right? If we are moving towards, this promise of a circular economy, which can get us 40% reduction in carbon emissions, for example, and could create a lot of other environmental and social benefits for us, we are adding to the complexity of supply chain, or potentially adding to the complexity of supply chain transparency, right? Because in a circular world, who is a supplier? If we have a sharing economy, who becomes the supplier of a good or a service? If we have a recycling economy, who becomes the supplier of the plastic? I'll come back to this one in a second, but if these companies are pledging to increase their recycled content in their materials, in their packaging materials, for example, where does that recycled content come from? It does not yet, and likely will not, 100% come from the suppliers that they are working with today, right? If you have a supply chain strategy that tells you to have, a few strategic suppliers for your most important commodities that you're sourcing, there's a reason for that. You build security, you build reliability, better pricing conditions, etc. But now you're saying we're going to throw that all up in the air, and we're going to a messy supply chain. I don't know if you're familiar with the word gleaning. There's a famous painting called The Gleansters, where these women, a couple of 100 years ago, are picking seeds of grains, or grains off the field after the big harvest has been done. And I always compare that with the circular economy, because what they're doing is they create value from something that is highly dispersed, lots of little nuggets of value in a big field of nothingness, right? In a big field of no value. This is what we're trying to do in a circular economy. We have put all of our products out there in the market, and now we're trying to get them back in order to create value again, right? So if you are the poor manufacturer that needs to supply however many tons you are used to supplying in a linear in your value chain, you're used to picking up the phone and being able to say, Friday afternoon I need 3 tankers of whatever chemical at my loading dock, to be covered for the next week or so. How hard is that going to be in a circular economy? And we're not just talking about commodities like plastics, where there are ways to pull that together, but if we talk, for example, about, if resale I think this is a bit of a pipe dream. I don't think it's going to be bigger than fast fashion, unfortunately, by 2029. But, if resale is a big driver of, for example, the fashion world, where are these products sitting? In what condition are they? And how are they going to come back to me? Yeah. This is a big, it's easier in an industry like this one, the medical equipment, because the item tickets are much bigger, right? Every product comes with a much better, higher price, a higher value, and it's sitting in a lot less locations, right? But in a circular economy, my supply chain, working with my supply chain and making it sustainable will now involve knowing where does my product sit, what condition is it in, right? So I need to know if I'm going to take back a magnetic imaging or MRI equipment. What condition is it in? How many cycles has it been through? I had a client who was taking back X-rays, X-ray cores, from their X-ray equipment. There's value left in it, but they only had one metric, and it was age. Right? Let's say if it was younger than a certain age, they would take it back and pay money to the hospital for it. If not, they would not. Because they had the certainty that if it was younger than a certain age in their mind, then they could still, rework it and create a new life cycle out of it. It was completely primitive as a metric, but because they had not optimized their systems around it, it was the only metric they could work with, because they could look at the sales transaction and say, okay, this is how old it is. They discovered in a workshop that we did together that they were losing 60% of the value this way. There were cores, pieces of these equipment out there that they could affordably get back and keep out of the hands of the gray market if only they would look at usage cycles. Nobody was doing that. They actually discovered that they already had the technology in place to do that, but nobody was using it for that purpose, right? So knowing where stuff sits and what condition it is in, and then of course how you're going to get it back. My view for the circular economy supply chain is this. Does anyone know what this is actually? Huh? Yeah, it's the Falcon Heavy, right? So is it the launch of the Falcon Heavy? No, it's the return. It's the return of the booster rockets, right? So this vision, you can have a lot of issues with sorry, you can have a lot of issues with Elon Musk, but the vision was if we're going to make space travel affordable, then we need to not just send pieces of equipment out there and lose them, right? We need to be able to get them back and use them again and again. And so in this attempt, only the booster rockets came back safely, but in next attempts, they got the main parts as well. So my vision is, in this world, we should not put any product out into the market without having a plan for how to get it back. Yeah? Because only then we can build supply chains where we know, and this is our opportunity, of course, right? All of these problems that I evoked in the beginning for the linear supply chain of, not knowing who our suppliers are and the subcontractors, not knowing what they're doing, etc., not knowing how good the stuff is that they're sending us. If this is our product, we will know, as long as we can get it back in an affordable way and without value destruction, etc. If this crashes, then then yes, you had a plan, but you still had value destruction. This requires a couple of different things, and I'll finish there. It requires information. So I gave the example of the X-ray machines. This is another example. This is the Maersk latest generation, the Triple E, that's already a couple of years old. When they built this, they added a material passport. So the majority of the ship is steel, right? But there's actually 5 different kinds of steel in there. If you know this, and if you know where it sits, and also the upgrades you've been doing over time, you can actually maximize the value recovery rather than sending it into some wrecking yard and it all goes as low quality, the lowest quality steel, mixed steel. You can now start pulling out all of the high value parts. So information about your product, information about where it sits and the quality, but it also needs to be supported by IT systems. I'm sure that Rakesh and his colleagues are excellent at supporting that, and it can be supported by contractual arrangements. And this is really important as well. We need to change our relationship with the product after it leaves our factory gates, also through contractual arrangements. For example, I had a discussion with a steel company that they were actually not too amazed by the idea, or not looking too down on the idea that you could lease steel. They wouldn't mind hanging on to their high quality automotive steel, for example, and being able to get it back after you and I are done with our car. There's no reason why that would go to the wrecking yard and end up in the commodity market. They would like to get it back because they know that the Volvo steel or whatever is really qualitative. So there's a contractual element that we can do there as well. And I have no idea how long I talked, so sorry.
Thank you. Thank you, Helga, for that vision and also putting things in place for us. So, after listening to that, let's once again go back to our audience and participants. So, Maki, you here are representing consumers. Can you tell us one issue that you face when we talk of sustainable products and so on? One,
okay. If they are the product, they never up the price, and actually I'm not sure, but I did a clear explanation about what the real impact we made for choosing the product. Yeah, so I want to ensure what exactly the product offering the truly sustainable. Yeah.
Thank you. So, you want to know the impact and you want to pay a fair price. Winland, you are representing here a brand retailer. What are your issues when we talk of implementing some of that vision and practices?
In our side, mostly it's about the know-how, how to do it, and also the financial concern, how much we have to pay.
So knowledge and access to capital. Okay, Leo, you are representing the factory, the manufacturer for this brand. What are issues for you?
My issue is I'm not sure how to source my material and how to snap correct material to produce a sustainable product.
Okay. So you need a supply chain which is ready with that. Now we talk about money. So Martin, financier, what are your issues?
Greenwashing. Yeah. The only thing I worry most is whether the things I purchase is really green or not.
Okay. Thank you. Let's look a little deeper into supply chain practices then. having looked at the big vision, let's now hear from Sheila about what Adidas is doing and how are things going. Yeah?
Thank you, everyone. I'm so glad to be here today to share about the supply chain consideration. I just hear about a lot of questions on the price, on the whether greenwashings, whether your product is sustainable. I may not able to answer all, but I first of all would like to give you all visibility and transparency on how the apparel and footwear industry is working right now. So I hope also give you some more idea what we consider when we producing a sustainable products. So I think from what you also very familiar about sustainability, I remember like 3 years ago when we were talking about sustainability, first of all, no one know what we are talking. What is it? What is sustainability? Maybe the people only remember that time is talking about CSR, about the social responsibility. But then right now the people more in the market, the customer more understand, oh, right now we need to address the sustainability issue, including those global trends talking about the climate change, the traceability, visibility. But could you imagine all those asks, all those demands coming from the customer? What does it mean in the supply chain? What happened? You can see we're talking about carbon emissions. We're talking about how your product is traceable, where its origins. But when come to a factory or come to a brand, how we convert them those into our execution plan. So, oh, sorry, those it's changing. So right now you can see there are a lot of asks, but that means from us when we receive those asks, then we will see like, oh, how our supply chain working right now? What information or what data will lead? Then what is the, a lot of questions coming up. Then first of all, it's about what is the challenge right now, how we get those visibility of the supply chain. So the first one is about the alignment among all the country, across the countries is leaking. It's not really like already standardized. I also saw some of the asks raised up by the audience here, also whether we have the standardized standard. And how also complex on the supply chain. Also Helga touched on about the supply chain, how we can really make it circular. But right now, when we're talking about the supply chain visibility, it's also how we working on those lower tiers one, not only the first tiers. And also regarding the competence level on the supply chain regarding the sustainability part. They have different level, they have different understanding, also amongst all across the countries. And at the end, it's about the cost. How does it really after a lot of sustainability asks, what does it mean in terms of the cost? So first, I believe some of the, I'm so sorry about the slide that not really easy to read. If you are not familiar of the footwear or apparel industry, I would like to give you some really basic understanding how the supply chain look like. They are not a linear or vertical. They are really a big network that we will have stuff from the tier 4. Tier 4 we call like the raw materials, whether they come from, like the cotton farm, the leather hide, and then we will go to different processing. We will call T3 or T2. They will have the tanning process, the dyeing process, the spinning part. At the end, we will go to our manufacturer, the product manufacturer. They really produce the product. Then at the end, we'll go to the shop, and then at the end, go to the consumer. So when we have one manufacturer, they will go to different process, and they will go down more and more tiers. So these are like a trees, not only a linear network. So in case if you don't familiar on the apparel and footwear industry. So then, I just, in the beginning of the slide, I also mentioned there are a lot of asks. Not only one topic about sustainability, so easy. We have climate, we have traceability, we have human rights, different topic like come to the supply chain. So from a brand, we have the direct contractual relationship with tier 1. Then we will really like have a lot of a standardized approach to manage our tier 1 on how it will look like on the sustainability. Then we will highly rely on the tier 1 to cascade all the requirements to all the tier 2 and also further cascade to tier 3. So how we can really create the transparency and the sustainable supply around the whole sustainable supply chain. It's not only about one tiers, it's how we can really cascade all the requests and also create all the data information collection from all the down of the tiers. So this is one of the major focus of a brand when we produce a sustainable product. We also need to understand where they come from already. Not only from the first layer, we also how the multiple layer is working. So like adidas, we are the brand that we also starting from thinking about how we can be forward thinking to think about what we need to coming to prepare the change. So from our strategy that we also like putting our consumer as a center to think about what right now the focus from the industry. Then we will base on the credibility, experience, and then we will try to really push more on how we want to do on the sustainability part. So from this one, when we talking about the supply chain, we will have the focus to drive the cleaner supply base, then what the cleanness means, and what we need to consider. From our like internal organization, we will start from our top management, start from the board of directors, just what Rakesh mentioned. There are lots of investors also looking into then what we need to do. So we will start from the top and then to really convert into the strategy and execute into our management. Also under the planning operation level. And then we also really like driving to our external vendor as well. Ensure that they also have the systemic mindset, what is the direction going. Then how we can build up this cleaner supply base. There are four key issues that we will also considering. First of all is the policy and regulations. There also have some of the countries, they really have a good foundations that are also a key standard on how we drive the sustainability and really help to standardize the sustainable manufacturing practice in that countries. But some of them, is still in the development stage. They are not yet in this journey. Then from a brand side, that we also think we need to be really engaging in those policy engagement and also help to bring those like some countries that they are still developing, how they can really increase or prepare for the upcoming changes. And then the second part is the innovation. We also will, to prepare those policy or new regulations, sometimes we also be thinking about what technology or what kind of materials or what kinds of methodology that we need to implement in our internal organization, or how to change our product to be produced in order to meet the coming new regulation or policy that will be happen. And then the third will be the investment. So when we're talking about innovation, that means we also need to have some highly linked to the cost. Then what kind of investment we need to do in order to maybe both internal and external as well. Internally is maybe we need to invest on how we change our product to be developed, and then how to support our supplier to also change their manufacturing process to be much more innovative and then to be sustainable. Then at the end also will be the capacity building. Because as I mentioned that we have the cost pressure, we also have different competence level across the countries. Then that means we also need to bring in the capacity building for all the our vendors, how they understand on sustainability, and let them know, okay, maybe what kind of new regulations will coming, and then they need to get prepared. And also internally, we also need to educate our designer, whether the materials right now you use is still sustainable enough, what kind of innovation technology you need to change in order to make this product can be sustainable. So that is for my presentation.
Thank you, Sheila. So, Helga, you touched upon need for information, you touched upon innovation with your examples. Adidas showcase their focus on innovation. They showcase their multi-tier supply chain, or can we call it a supply web instead of a chain? Okay. And they also focused on investment and capacity building. Are you happy? Are you happy based on what you saw in terms of your big picture vision and what a company is doing?
I think the complexities of closing the supply chain, in a loop in a circular world, obviously get multiplied again with if you have a web to start out with rather than one linear supply chain, right? So how do you now add the circular one in there? Because everything sits at a very different level than your tier 4 supplier here. Yeah. I don't know if you have an answer, but.
One major thing that we also keep driving is when tier 1 have something like the waste management part, like how they can really take up those waste and recycling back. Maybe go back to the tier 2. Tier 2 also how you can really use back your materials, try to minimize the waste and make it recycling. This is what we can try to really become a loop.
So, now, after looking at the supply chain and what's going on, let's come again to a product level. And let's talk about this topic of chemicals in product, because as you know, everybody in chemistry says everything is made of chemistry. So how are you taking care of that, Rodney, with HASBRO?
Hi. Okay. So there are a lot of questions and there are a lot of high-level discussions. I would like to bring just one specific topic to discuss. I mean, from our perspective, is about chemical management and how it relates to sustainability. So, in HASBRO, I think some of you should already be aware, like HASBRO is one of the biggest toy manufacturer. So we have a lot of brands. We have My Little Pony, Monopoly, Transformer, Nerf. Recently, we also have Peppa Pig, PJ Masks. So our approach to sustainability need to be by phase. So first of all, we are working on to get a plastic-free packaging. So this is what we are work in progress. And then we will work brand by brand. For example, we have Mr. Potato Head Go Green. We have Monopoly Go Green initiative that we are working on. So how does those kind of initiatives actually come from our sustainability group in Rhode Island in the US. So they will do some preliminary research based on sustainable material available in the markets. They will do the due diligence, the sustainability assessment. And a lot of the questions that you have asked will be asked in that process as well. Like, what does it mean by sustainability? What kind of claim we can make if we make this product using this particular materials, right? So is 50% recycled material enough? Is 30% good enough? 35? So what is the percentage that make you able to claim a product to be sustainable? So those kind of initiative will be discussed. And for me in particular, I would be involved in the chemical risk assessment. So you might be asking, how does it relate? Like, what does chemical has to do with sustainability? I will talk a little bit further later on. So in these particular steps, there is one term that I would like you to understand. It's called a BOS. In the toy industry, bill of substance is a very important concept. So what we are working right now is to work with our OEM vendors and their material suppliers, or what we call our critical material suppliers, to collect their material BOS. BOS means the chemical composition of their material. So every material, the table that you're using, the chair that you're sitting on, the glass that you're wearing, has their own BOS. Even the air that we are breathing in has the BOS. So there's oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, right? This is the BOS. Even our body, made out of chemicals, has a BOS. So every material, we need to assess the BOS, understand what chemicals go in, and assess what is the risk to the to human, to animals, to environment. So of course, for critical materials or for high-risk material, we will do some testing. So sustainable material. So for us, the kind of sustainable material that comes into our kind of scope right now, including, for example, recycled material, post-consumer recycled, including biomass balance material. If you have heard about biomass balance approach, mass balance, there are certification involved. So biodegradability, etc. So, but the issues with each materials have their own risk, of course, like recycled material, for example. Where is the source of what is the source of recycled material? So for toys, if some of you are familiar with toy industry, there are a lot of chemical requirements in toys. And the requirements sometimes are quite, I would say, ridiculous. Say, for example, the EU requirements on toys, they basically, the heavy metals requirement on toys are even more stringent than drinking water. So sometimes I would say it is safer for you to consume a HASBRO toys than having a fried rice. So, I mean, from chemical safety perspective, right? So the other thing is we have a lot of so-called biomass materials available. Are those direct drop-in? Are those like, is there any property change? Do we need to do any engineering? Can we use HDPE, for example, from Braskem to replace the ABS and PVC that we are using for Mr. Potato Head? So if we can explore more and more applications for this type of materials in our product lines, we can kind of use a lot more of this kind of sustainable materials. So biodegradability is one thing. I think you should know that plastic, most of the plastic are not biodegradable, right? So there are a technology, actually, there's a technology called, there's a master batch that you could add to a plastic and make it biodegradable. But the problem is then, what does it mean by biodegradable? How do you say, I add a master batch of PVC and it start degrading after 1 year? Does that mean that it classify as biodegradable? Because there are regulations that are very stringent, especially like in California. If you want to claim your product is biodegradable, that you need to meet specific standards. So these are the challenges, or also the same questions that we are asking during the material research. So in the regulatory landscape for toys, it's very complicated. I just list out some chemical-related regulations, and there are so many. So the topics may be similar, but the requirements are different. So if you are doing business with Europe, for example, there are some, even within Europe, for example, France has a very interesting regulations recently. So we have to develop a strategy for us as a global company how to comply the global regulations. So from a chemical perspective, chemical management perspective, what HASBRO is doing is we have developed with a third party, of course, a third party software company, we have developed a chemical management database platform that we are using. Not only us, but also our OEM vendors and our critical material suppliers. So we try to manage not only so-called tier 1 in adidas, we also try to manage one more tier up, the critical material suppliers. In toys, the high-risk material suppliers or the critical material suppliers like printing materials, like PVC compounds, like paint and inks, like master batch pigments, those type of material. You can see we have the different system to store their BOS information. If you remember, BOS is the chemical composition information. So a lot of you might ask, how do you get the BOS? So this is actually a long process, working with the suppliers, gaining their trust, signing NDA, and getting them to release their BOS information to HASBRO directly. So, just a quick overview. Yesterday, I looked into our chemical management database platform. There are maybe 100,000 plus chemicals in commercial use. In our HASBRO substance, so-called substance on watch list, it doesn't mean that substance on watch doesn't mean restrict. It could be the substance need to be reported in certain US states. It could be the substance is classified as an endocrine disruptor. Then we want to like flag when it's inside our product and we want to understand what it's used. So it's a substance on watch list around 8,205. So we are doing assessment against these 8,000 plus chemicals and it's growing. So in the HASBRO products, like yesterday, when we count, we have 3,711 chemicals in the HASBRO SKU. So among those, 1,339 are approved in so-called MCMD. MCMD is our material supply, the platform that our material supplier using, the tier 2, like the suppliers of our OEM vendors. So to do the assessment or to support the sustainability initiative, we are not only assessing, for example, chemical hazards. Chemical hazards like, is it skin irritants? Is it what they call allergenic response? We also need to assess what are the exposures. Not only exposures to the kids when they play, during normal play, but also the end of life. When it's go to landfill, for example, if it leaches to the ocean, is it bioaccumulative? Is it toxic to the ocean animals? So what are the toxicity? So when we kind of develop our own formulation product, for example, or our plastic products, we need to understand what chemicals are going inside, and after life, well, how would the chemical affect the environment? So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rodney. Thank you for telling us how many chemicals are being looked at to make those wonderful toys. I'm glad my 4-year-old daughter was not here, because if she heard, there would be many questions for you to answer. So, all right. So, Elsa, thank you for patiently taking in all of that information. And we're talking of information and how you make best use of it. We heard from Helga's talk, and she said, well, to use information for this medical company. We saw the example from Sheila and Adidas about this complex supply chain. But at the end, she also spoke about the need for investment. We saw from HASBRO about this information mega database and how they connect everything. So first of all, if you could reflect on it, and then if you could tell us how can all of this be used to make efficient decisions, both as a company, but also as an investor and maybe as governments. Ms. Elsa Pau.
Yep, as I was listening, I was showing Sheila the deep dive of her company. And she actually walks her talk. It's actually a very good score across the board. All right, so, okay, I'm just going to do away with the mic. Can you all hear me in the back? Yay. Take a deep breath. Okay, so apologies, I've been very lazy. I do not have a PowerPoint. So I just conveniently screen capped a few slides from a normal portal of a fund. So Rakesh mentioned earlier that you have your supply chain, then go to the next level of the company who utilizes materials of the supply chain, advisor of the supply chain, and then later on you have the company shares and stocks, which needs to be invested by investors, right? So of course the whole thing about alternative energies and the whole circular economy on the hardware side, you would still rely on the institutional investors. You still need to rely on the PE and VCs. But let's come down to the ground for a minute. Let's look at how you and I, as normal people then on the street, can support circular economy. Right? We don't have multi-millions to buy those turbines, or what do you call that? The rockets? Yeah. Are you sure it's not one of Elon Musk's intention to ship his batteries to Mars one day?
I wouldn't exclude the intention, but that
So I'm talking about, I'm going to use a few minutes to talk about at the product level, right? So the product means, it's investment products, which you and I probably have an MPF, investments, everyone invests in mutual funds, whether you know it or not, right? So we're all in the investment world. So what do these investment managers do? Now, Mark, you mentioned earlier, you don't know who's greenwashing when you are buying things. Now, I don't know if you're buying things or the actual tangible product or it's an intangible product like investments. But let's start with a mutual fund, right? Because so much money is managed by asset managers. They're managing trillions and trillions of dollars. They are the ones who choose the companies to invest in. So among the audience, maybe you are coming from a listed company, you're coming from a supply chain, but eventually, at the end of the day, you're going to be part of this chain where the money comes from. So we cannot just say, all right, you blame it on lack of capital. But at the same time, you also need to provide the level of clarity so that at the level of BlueOnion, we know exactly what's going on. Like Sheila was saying, okay, let me check you out, and then I can validate what she's saying is real, right? So it's that level of clarity. So Adidas could be one of the stocks in a portfolio. It could be together with Nike or someone else. And when the asset managers are choosing a product, a company to invest in, those are the things that they would look for. Now, earlier someone mentioned the challenges being the lack of standardizations or the lack of frameworks. Actually, there are a lot of frameworks. There are over 600 taxonomies out there as we speak. It is very confusing, I know. You just don't know which taxonomy is better than the other, which framework to go with. So you're just going to have to listen to your advisor, the bank's advisor. So I'm sorry, but most of the time they don't know, or they don't tell you the truth. So you would have to do some homework yourself, right? So I randomly picked a circular economy fund, which invests in the multiple sectors. I'll show you in a minute. So this one actually is targeting to achieve what they say. They're trying to achieve the SDG number 3 for health, good health, and zero hunger, and responsible consumption and production, etc. So this is what they claim in the prospectus. So you want to hold them accountable. So what I did also was to choose the MSCI SRI, Socially Responsible Investment Index, to measure this one against. So that's being fair, right? You won't just use a Hang Seng Index or any index. So it turns out this fund is actually not performing as well as the MSCI SRI index. Right? It doesn't mean it's very bad because the SRI index has the best of the best leading companies in the index. So it's very hard to beat. Right? So you can see basically the good companies and the bad companies in the peer group being incorporated to the portfolio. You would also see there's an SFDR. So anyone who knows SFDR, does anyone know what SFDR means? Okay, so this is one of the frameworks. It is the EU, right? The EU's framework to measure a portfolio of products sustainability level. So there's the level 6, the Article 6, which means you have to declare that you are not integrating ESG. So the risk is on you, Mr. Consumer. And Article 8 is the manager has to demonstrate that ESG characteristics are being integrated to the portfolio. So that's Article 8. And Article 9 is, I wouldn't say harder to achieve, but it's different. You have to demonstrate the thematic, the impact that you will create by investing investors' money into it. So that's Article 9. So far, this fund is approved for Article 9, but buyers beware. As of this year, 1,500 out of 6,000 funds that were approved for Article 9 is now at the risk of losing their status because of the component or the content that they invested, the percentage not really arriving at what the regulators would like. So this gives you some kind of a clarity in just one little header. All right, so just give you a snapshot of what it does, what it's trying to achieve, whether it's doing it, and it looks like it's ready. And this slide, again, my apologies for being too lazy. I just dropped because I know that we can talk about doing good all day long, but at the end of the day, am I making money, right? So this is very important for the investors to also look at the financial returns, some kind of a dual materiality that's emerging. So the blue line is actually the index, and the black line is the fund, the circular economy fund. And this is quite a volatile fund, many losing quarters and months. So you have to be aware of whether or not this is some kind of a risk that you can take for doing good, for supporting the circular economy. So this is one of the ideas that you need to consider. Now, let's spend a little bit more time here. As you can see, there are many metrics here, but I was told I can only have 4 slides, so I was behaving. I just brought one slide, and it is for the environment. All right. So there are many other metrics. If you're interested, let me know. I'll help you with it. So you want to know that out of all these companies that you are investing, so this it's not just the top 10; it's the whole portfolio you see on this dashboard. And I don't have space, but if you click on this fund, this company, let's say if it's Adidas, then you'll see the whole Adidas behavior like that, right? Very detailed as to their E, S, and G characteristics. So all of these companies would have a listing of their scores. So, for example, not just the opportunities, but also the risk, right? So there's also another segment for risk. But you want to know that, this is something I want to touch on also, because country risk is not something that private companies can do on their own. It also has to get the collaboration and the cooperation of the sovereign nations, which is a totally different topic when we talk about sovereign debts, because we need to hold the sovereign nations accountable as well. So you want to see more greens than red. And here are the environmental management. And one thing I want to bring up is also about the sectors, because you can see the different sectors and industry. Now, not every industry is the same. As I was showing Sheila earlier, the SASB materiality map. Does anyone know what that is? It's actually very interesting. It looks like this, right? You see these color bars? That means the darker the color it is, the more material the factor is for that particular segment. So in the situation of the apparel and accessories and footwear, ironically, environmental is not material at all. No color You see? So she was also very surprised. So this brings to another challenge in the industry about standardization or ratings, right? Because what's going on right now is you have a fund manager or a company who wouldn't get a good rating with MSCI, so they started shopping around, right? Will Sustainalytics give me a better rating, or will S&P give me a rating? The reason being that is every of these rating agencies, they have their own interpretation of classification. So the minute you put that company in this sector or this industry, everything will change, as you see here. Not every single sector, not every industry is the same. So if you put like a Swire into a food and beverage versus you put Swire into a property management, they belong to the different sector and the different materiality issues will then govern the score at the end. So it's the classification of the business, the sectors that the materiality issues of the sectors that would really make a difference to the rating. And it's fair because we won't expect a Moody's or a Fitch to be rating the same company the same rating, right? Nobody has an authority over another. So it's fair. So it's up to the investors to understand which taxonomy is more appropriate for them. So if you are an investor actively driving impact, you may want to adopt the SDG framework that is associated with many other materiality issues that is driving factors. So you want to know this circular economy, which has 124 companies in this portfolio, that the total carbon footprint is creating, the toxic waste reduction is producing as compared to the index, the water pollution, everything very material to the circular economy, and then energy consumption as well as recycled and reused waste. So these are the typical environmental pollution type of indicators. And finally, I'm packing everything in one slide. So making it one slide. Okay, so here's the risk part of things, right? So the top 10 most important companies in the portfolio, are they doing very well in these issues? Are they posing a big risk for environment? Again, if you need to know the dominating sector in the portfolio so that you can measure the materiality against the most dominating. So if this is a portfolio like earlier we saw that most of them are chemicals, industrials, semiconductors, infrastructure, right? Actually, working conditions and safety is very material for these sectors, not just the environment, but labor safety and product safety, very important, very material. So you want to track the manager, whether it's on the steadily upward trends, because this is a transition story. They don't necessarily have to invest in a company that is already doing very well in circular economy, but they are transiting. So you would expect the trends to be steadily going up, but definitely not randomly. And then here is what we are always paying attention is the Paris Accord. It's a 2030 pathway in the near term, and the 2050 pathway, the far term. Is it becoming more and more aligned towards that scenario? So in a nutshell, that's what I have for you. Questions or maybe later?
Elsa, you touched upon regulations in Europe. You mentioned about European requirements. You mentioned about policy. And many of you mentioned about the topic of standards, certifications, access to finance, and multitude of standards. Well, fortunately, a group of experts, a large group of experts from the world, from 97 countries, have got together to pin down and write down exactly what standard and metric to use for many of those ESG criteria that we spoke of. So the bigger picture, we all know why it's all happening. Well, why it's happening, finite resources, we are expanding, we are using too much more than what we have, and our economies are linear in many cases. One answer to that is Europe's Green Deal and the Circular Economy Action Plan, which also has focus on financing green projects. So which industries are in focus? Well, batteries, electronics, plastic, textiles, buildings, and packaging. And what does it mean? So we know the why, we know the how, why are these policy measures, and what is it that we are talking of? Well, we are talking of sustainable products, which means better durability, repairability, reusability. No harmful substances, that Rodney stressed upon. Energy and resource efficient, less waste, less waste, less waste, less material. And to be based on product environmental footprints, scientific methodology which looks at all impacts of a product based on how it's produced and based on where the materials come from. And finally, it culminates into a sustainability label which has to be based on independent third-party verification established by public authorities. So the similar labels exist in China, in Australia, in many Nordic countries, and what Europe is doing is making that a minimum. But it's not stopping in Europe. We have similar developments taking place in China, even during the COVID pandemic, where you see these big policy drivers on reducing waste, on reducing energy, to have this green finance catalog and so on. And on the right-hand side, it's not just policies, but it's also pilot projects. It's not an eye test, but what you see on the right-hand side, these graphs, they are indicating the amount of money which went into these pilot projects on green production and so on. Now let's link all of that green criteria on products and supply chains to finance, which is what we've been hearing about. This is from the platform on sustainable finance from Europe, where you see one of the pillars is on circular economy, and it has requirements such that it reduces the pressures on chemicals, pollution, biodiversity. What are we talking of? Just Europe doing it? Not just Europe doing it. You see all of these countries here, many of those flags here, perhaps some of these countries you like to holiday in, perhaps some of these countries where you sell your products. Many of them have committed to sustainable finance, to making finance accessible, but based on what criteria? They have criteria too, and they have several frameworks and disclosures. We heard some of those acronyms from Elsa earlier. So we have the SASB standard from the Value Reporting Foundation, which is industry-based, but we also have the TCFD, GRI, and so on. Over 700 disclosure items were looked at and compared by a group of 97 experts all over the world, with over 24,000 ISO standards. Have you all come across ISO 14,000 series, ISO 50,000 series here? All of that. And finally, 527 ISO standards were selected to map to over 700 ESG disclosures. So there you go. When disclosure is based on, of course, standards, which are clear because they are explained clearly, so everybody agrees to it, which are based on consensus, and which can go through the process of conformity assessment to avoid greenwashing. That was the task given by the UN to ISO, and the final report will be out next month. 527 ISO technical standards finally linked to all the ESG disclosures that are there across these frameworks. So coming back to the problem statement, we remember the company, Product Incorporated, they had a challenge, they made a report, their ratings were not so good, value deterioration. Here are the international standards. Here is that company and says, well, either all these standards, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? What should I care about? ISO says, here is a toolbox. Here is a toolbox of standards that you can use to showcase your progress on materiality, on sustainability aspects, to of course support all of this. So let's go a little further ahead, not an eye test, but here, this European Financial Reporting Advisory Group talks about what circular economy metrics are relevant for sustainability reporting. So there are different aspects, E, S, and G. Within environment, there's climate, pollution, water, biodiversity, and resource use and circular economy. So what do these financial people want? They want to know resource inflows, resource outflows, waste generated, resource use optimization, and circularity support. So we heard earlier about how much percentage recycled is okay. What is good? That goes a little further now. So these financial disclosures will say, okay, you know this famous butterfly diagram, you know it very well, Helga, which talks about these two cycles, the natural and the technical cycle. Yeah. So on the left-hand side, with all of these natural cycle, there are standards and certification schemes which have been mapped. So if somebody wants to claim biodegradability based on a standard, it exists. If somebody wants to talk about renewable energy schemes, it exists. And the same is for the technical side on recycled content verification. There is a standard, ISO 14021. But we still talk about, so what percentage is good? How much recycled content is good for what products? It goes further. This comes out from this World Business Council for Sustainable Development with their circular transitions indicators, where what you can do is actually, based on those metrics, you can calculate for your product and your supply chain material circularity, water circularity, renewable energy use, and so on, which gives you a score. It tells you a status quo, and it tells you how to move forward. That goes a little further. Based on the performance of your supply chain and your product, then it will become eligible to get one of these labels or schemes. This one from the German government, this one from the Nordics, and many of them are comparable. The criteria are similar. So what do these criteria look like? That's from the Germans, that's from the Dutch. That's how it looks like. So this says recycle content materials for toys, for example. It says 80% by weight of each recycled material, yeah, should come from post-consumer recycled materials. And then similar requirements for chemicals, repairability, and so on. So that's where the link takes place between the financial requirements that your investor relations team would be dealing with and the product level requirements which your product design team and supply relation teams are looking at. Having heard from all of our speakers and panelists earlier, what we see is, of course, the hotspots have been identified. We've been hearing about this all over the news. For many of us, we've seen what's happening there. We've heard of policy, not just in Europe, but also in Asia, in China. We heard about demand and commitment. You go out there, every bank is talking about how they're taking care of the money of the investors and committing to finance net zero, circular economy, and so on. We heard a lot about standards and technical standards on product level. So perhaps this is the start of an era of innovation on steroids. Now, before we end, if there are some questions that you have in mind, something that you want to ask, please feel free to put your hand up. Or you could also note it down on the paper there, and every question that you put down will be answered related to this topic. Yeah? And meanwhile, if you could again scan that QR code and just mention, as you walk out from here, what would you do? What is the one thing that you do? So Martin, you have agreed that for every response that we get, you will donate 50 Hong Kong dollars to WWF Hong Kong, yeah? Okay. So either scan the QR code and put your answer in, or on a piece of paper. What would you do as you go out from here? Now it's time for questions or...
So thank you for sharing all those standards available. I'm wondering if there are any standards particularly for low carbon or carbon footprint assessment, because I'm not too aware of that.
So the question was if there are specific standards for low carbon or low carbon assessment, and if any of your companies are using it. Otherwise, I will go ahead and...
Some sectors are very red, right? If you are in the mining sector, the threshold will be very, very high. So it should be a comparison, a relative comparison with the peers rather than a set standard, right? So of course, if you know the lowest emitter, then you may want to benchmark yourself against that lowest emitter.
Yeah. Regarding the supply chain manufacturing part, when we say low carbon, first of all, we will ask, what does low carbon define? So we need to first define what does low carbon means. But then when right now everyone also talking about carbon emissions, how also we measuring it, also how we know how the carbon really like producing in your scope 1, scope 2, scope 3. Also in one of the theater, we're also talking about the scope 3 emissions. And what we can do, try to standardize on the approaches. Maybe we also push our supply chain to follow the science-based target initiative. And this is a one step how to really standardize your approach on your disclosure. Once how you disclose, you standardize, then you can look into how we start to standardize our measurement. And then at the end, then we can talk about whether we're using the same measurement rule to talking about we are all, when we say we are low carbon on this part, then they're also using the same measurement. Right now, because when everyone interpret will be in a quite different way. So this is the first step right now in the apparel and footwear industry. Also I heard like a lot of industry also facing a similar challenge. They maybe like right now we start from measuring disclosure on the same way, then we can start to talk about what is the low carbon.
Yeah. Were you referring from a product perspective? From product perspective. So there's of course a standard ISO 14067 for calculating the footprint. And now France, for example, says on products, consumer products, there must be a carbon label. And then you're thinking, wait a second, I made a product which is robust, which is strong, and hence the embodied carbon is higher. And another one made something which has the same functional use. I made a garment and another company B made a garment. Mine has higher embodied carbon, I'm using better materials and so on, and this other one has not. So is my product bad? So what European Union says, no, hold on. Is the functional unit the same? It's a garment? Yes. What is the duration of use? Please showcase with standards that your product was durable for 100 wears. For footwear, it's like 50 wears. And then they divide it based on the number of applications to say, what's your carbon intensity of the product? And then you will be able to compare two products based on embodied carbon, based on this product environmental footprint standard. And let's see if we have some feedback. Okay. After colleagues go out from here, they will check the latest standards. That's what you suggested, Elsa, that they have to study, yeah? Continue investing in ESG. Buy sustainable products. Support tech solutions. Thank you. Thank you also for sharing your expectations up front. If you feel some of your expectations were not met with the information and discussion so far, first of all, I want to apologize. And secondly, I want to request you to write down on a paper the question which was not answered, and we will respond to every unanswered question then, yeah? What would you do as you go out from here? What is the one thing that you would do based on this theme?
I think I'm falling behind in my number one as well. Check the latest standards because I feel I'm falling behind on keeping up with all of them. And I think especially developments like you were just talking about, how the carbon standards or footprint measurements are related, now increasingly tied to circularity, which is my area of work. I see opportunities there, so I'm going to look into that a little bit more.
I will immediately look into the mapping, why the apparel and footwear industry didn't solve up the environmental part.
Me and my team will undertake to take this very complicated platform to a more layman level. So any one of you very soon will be able to land on a portal and define what you're looking for, and then it tells you where you can find that investment. So it's going to be very, very democratized in a way.
For me, I would work together with the sustainability team back in headquarters to lay out our sustainable visions. How do we carry out sustainable materials in our product?
Thank you. I'll echo what my 12-year-old daughter told me. She said, if there's anything interesting you find, just tell it to 5 people. 5 people and tell each one of them to discuss with 5 more people. I'll do that. And I want to say thank you for taking time. Thank you for your questions. Thank you for your contribution and participation. And thank you for sharing your wisdom. I appreciate it. Thank you.